My name is Louis Teague, and I'm the director of this film, and I assume you've already looked at it. Otherwise, I urge you to stop this commentary right now and go back and watch the film. I have a friend who is a type A type personality, and he likes to watch the commentaries the first time that he watches the film because he doesn't want to waste any time. And he also is on his cell phone reading a script at the same time. So if you're one of those types, please turn off this commentary and watch the film first. Because this is my favorite film of all the films that I've done. Because it's the most accomplished of the films that I've done, and also I had opportunity to work with some of the best people that I've worked with on any of my films. I'm going to appear to be jumping around a little bit in this commentary because I want to do two things. I want to give you as much history on the project as I can and explain some of my philosophies about filmmaking as it relates to this film. At the same time, I want to talk about scenes as they're occurring during my commentary, so I can be specifically relating to things on the screen. For example, the scene we're looking at right now of a Saint Bernard chasing a rabbit through a field and being bitten on the nose by a bat, the prologue, as it were, was shot second unit after we completed the first unit photography on the film. One of the reasons why this is my favorite film, and one of the reasons why I say it's the most accomplished of all the films that I've done, is that it was staffed top to bottom with the best people that I've ever worked with, starting with the producer, Dan Blatt. And Dan enabled me, because I wanted to direct the second unit myself, having been a second unit director before I became a first unit director, allowed me to shoot the second unit after we'd completed production with the actors. And so I was able to go out with the same cameraman and direct these scenes myself. Normally, a second unit is set up to shoot simultaneously with the first unit, and that means that there has to be a different director and a different photographer, which sometimes makes it very difficult to integrate the styles, the two styles of filmmaking. In the scene where the dog is chasing the rabbits through the field, Jan de Bont, the cameraman, and I invented some new camera dollies. We actually took a lawnmower handle, attached it to an upside-down hubcap that would slide through the grass, mounted the camera on the hubcap, and then pushed it around because obviously neither the dog nor the rabbit would follow any kind of prearranged path. In this scene that we're about to watch right now, with Danny Pintero, the 5-year-old boy, going to bed, I try to draw as much as possible on my own personal emotional experience, as I always do in a film. One of the components of filmmaking is to create emotion, and the only emotion that a director really knows for sure are those emotions that he's experienced. In this scene, Danny Pintero, after going to the bathroom, has to return to bed. And I used a little game. He's supposed to be scared of monsters in his closet. And I used a little game that I used to play when I was his age. I used to like to imagine that there were monsters either in my closet or under the bed. And one of the things that I felt that I had to do, one of the magical things I felt that I had to do, was I had to get from the light switch into my bed before the monster could attack me, because he could only come out when the lights were off. And to exaggerate this fear, this sense of fear when the lights go out, I constructed two sets. This set we're looking at right now is 3 times as long as the real set to lengthen the run that Danny has to take into the bed. And in this shot, the camera is upside down. Jan de Bont and I had to build this special rig that hung from the ceiling, and Jan got up there and operated the camera. The upside-down shot was actually a shot that I had originally seen in 1963 in a Russian film called The Cranes Are Flying, which ended with a Russian boy being chased across a field by a German tank, and the camera goes upside down, turns upside down as that shot to suggest the idea that his world has been turned upside down. And I'd always wanted to use that shot. And with Jan de Bont, the cameraman, I was able to build a rig and actually accomplish it. One of the extraordinary things about working with Jan, I was aware of Jan de Bont, the cameraman, from his films. He worked with a Dutch director called Paul Verhoeven in the 60s. He did a film called Kichi Tippel and another film called Turkish Delight, which I thought were magnificently photographed. So 15 years or so later, I met him in Hollywood. He'd come over to Los Angeles to see if he could work in American films, and I was looking for an opportunity to work with them when this film came along. In 1982, I received a call from Dan Blatt, who was producing Koo Joo, based on the Stephen King novel of the same title. I read the script. I liked it very much. I was already a Stephen King fan, and I liked the material. I went in and met with Dan, and Dan explained to me that the reason he had called me was that Stephen King had recommended that I direct the film. Stephen King had seen an earlier film of mine called Alligator, had liked it very much, had actually written about it in a nonfiction book about horror films that he'd written. And I met with Dan. I was very enthusiastic about doing this script. It was set up at a studio that I won't name at the moment. And Dan enjoyed the meeting and submitted my name to the studio. The studio had other thoughts about who should direct it. And so I didn't get the job. And I must say it was an enormous disappointment to me. I thought that all the stars had come together in just the right formation that indicated that I should be the one to direct this film. I loved the story. I was very enthusiastic. I had a lot of ideas about it. Stephen King had recommended me, and I just couldn't understand why fate wasn't letting me direct this film. But I swallowed my disappointment and went back to New York, where I directed a film called Fighting Back for Dino De Laurentiis. Dino De Laurentiis knew about my disappointment about not directing Koo Joo. So subsequently, when the deal between Dan Blatt and the studio that originally set the film up fell through, Dino said to me, "Louis, I know you want to do this a movie. I like this movie. I tell you what, you call the producer, tell him I want to buy the movie, and I let you direct." So I called Dan Blatt and to find out what the status was with the project. And Dan said, "Alas, it's already been set up at Warner Brothers." So once again, I was disappointed. But 2 weeks later, Dan called me and said that they were making a change, and asked if I was still interested. I said I was, and boom, I got the job. And I went off to direct this film. The reason that I like this story so much is that it's two things. One is I'd already developed some expertise directing scary movies. I'd done a film called Alligator, written by John Sayles, where I began to hone the techniques and styles and skills that I needed to create scary scenes and make an audience jump. And I'd also learned that one of the most important ingredients in a scary movie is to create characters who are real, believable, as John Sayles calls, they have a very high RHB factor, recognizable human behavior, so that the audience can care about the people. So when they are or do discover themselves in a scary predicament, that the audience cares about what happens to them. In this story, Stephen King tells the story of a family that moves from New York up to Maine so they can raise their child in a healthy environment. But at a certain point, their lives start unraveling because of fear. And fear, for me, is one of the most interesting themes that I could possibly explore. I've spent a large part of my life trying to learn the difference between real fear and imaginary fear. Unfortunately, in our lives, where much of our behavior is dictated by imaginary fear. Now, what I mean about that, if I'm crossing the street and I look up and I see a Greyhound bus bearing down on me, that's a real fear. And if I feel fear in that situation, it's healthy because it's going to motivate me into action. But if I'm afraid of paying the rent next month or next year, if I'm afraid that I'm going to wind up on the street pushing a shopping cart at some point in my life, if I'm afraid that a relationship that I'm in is not going to work out, those are imaginary fears. And the reason why they're imaginary fears is because they haven't happened yet. This scene we're looking, I'm going to interrupt the history of this project for a second. This scene we're looking at where we discover that Dee Wallace is having an affair with the local tennis bum was originally shot in a much more erotic way. I shot a scene where Dee appeared to be playing the piano with the camera slowly circling her with Chopin on the track. We think she's playing Chopin, and as the camera widens out, we see she's actually sitting on top of her lover, culminating the sex act. And it was fairly explicit, even though we didn't show anything. It was very erotic and emotional. And I loved the shot because it was a surprising reveal. But when the film was completed and we actually screened it for audiences, we found that younger people really disliked that scene, especially boys that were there on a date with their girlfriends. It was just out of keeping with the family style of the rest of the film. It wasn't the film the audience expected to see. It wasn't the kind of scene they expected to see in this kind of a film. So I removed the scene. It was a tough decision to make because it was a very effective scene. But I learned also in that it's very important to establish the kind of world that a story is taking place in the very beginning of a movie. And the world that the audience thought that they were in when they started watching this movie was a PG-rated film, not an R-rated film. So back to fear and the difference between real fear and imaginary fear. In this film, because the family has moved to Maine, Dee Wallace's character is kind of bored living up here in this small town. And her main fear is fear of growing old and being bored for the rest of her life, which she tries to counteract by having an affair with the local tennis bum. Daniel Hugh Kelly's character his fears are that he's going to be able to make enough money to support his family. Later in the story, when he loses his most important account, he's terrified that it's going to mean financial ruin for him. And Danny Pintero's character, the boy, senses the fear. He senses that things are wrong in the family and begins to imagine monsters in his closet. And when Koo Joo appears on the scene and traps Dee Wallace in her Pinto on the farm, it's the manifestation of a real fear which puts everything into perspective. So the theme of this film is that one should only be afraid of real fears, things that pose real threats. That if one behaves as if imaginary fears are real, it tends to become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hi.
As I said earlier, I replaced another director at the very beginning of this project and went in and started it. I went in and shot the film and started it from scratch. But I did inherit some of the original crew members. I made some important changes in the key areas. I brought in Jan de Bont, as I mentioned earlier, a Dutch cinematographer who I'd always wanted to work with. The relationship between Jan and myself was very creative, and it couldn't have been any better as far as I was concerned.
No, thank you.
Because Jan comes from the Dutch school of cinematography, where the director of photography is also the operator. He was responsible for actually setting up the shots. And since I'm a director who likes to move the camera a lot, I could discuss the nature of the photography and the camera moves with Jan. And Jan was very cooperative. As a matter of fact, he was more than cooperative. I couldn't challenge Jan enough. The more difficult the shot was, the more determined he was to get it.
I'll be down the hill and back. Want to have a listen to it?
Yeah, okay.
Vic?
Oh, it's all right.
In other parts of the world, notably United States and England, and perhaps to some degree Italy, where the director of photography is the person who's in charge of lighting the shot, and camera moves are discussed with the camera operator, there tends to be more resistance towards difficult camera moves. At least that's what I've discovered in my experience, because I've worked with English, Italian, American, German, Dutch photographers, and French photographers. And I'm much more in tune with the French, German, Dutch style of cinematography, in which I'm talking to one person about lighting and camera moves.
Monsters in Tad's closet. It's too small for you in there. See? Where else?
Under the bed.
Under the bed. Okay.
I didn't switch editors right away when I came on the project. And what happened was that as I started shooting this film, I was very pleased with the results that I was seeing in the dailies. I was very happy with the footage that was being shot. I was very happy with the performances. And I started looking at edited scenes on weekends. And I was shocked, because as I was looking at the edited scenes, they didn't work right. It didn't seem to have the life that I'd seen in the dailies or expected to see in the edited footage. And there was nothing wrong with the way it was edited. It seemed to make perfect sense. It was cutting to people when they were speaking, but it just didn't work. If anything, it was too logical. It was too predictable. So I decided to make a change, and I brought in Neil Travis to edit. And Neil had worked with a friend of mine, Taylor Hackford, on a film called The Idolmaker, and Taylor had recommended Travis very highly. So Neil came in and we reconstructed all the footage. In other words, we took all the footage that had already been edited, we took it all apart, and he started again from scratch. Then suddenly things started working. Suddenly scenes started flowing. Neil Travis had the magic touch to know exactly when to cut and when not to cut. He went on to win an Academy Award for Dances with Wolves, one of the two best editors in the business as far as I'm concerned.
Cute. That's our ad campaign. They've recalled the whole goddamn serial.
Then there's no harm done, is there?
No harm done. Donna, that guy comes into America's living room and he says to kids, he says, trust me.
Yes, I understand.
No, I don't think you do.
Dee Wallace and Daniel Hugh Kelly worked really well together. Dee Wallace is an extraordinary actress. She was able to do things with the back of her neck in scenes like this that were awesome, that most actors can't do with their whole body and face.
Red dye and scaring the hell out of their parents, and we told them to buy it. The sharp professor is us. That's our ass. Roger's in mine.
You'll work it out. You always have before.
All right, look, I appreciate this isn't a world crisis. This is not a mass suicide or anything.
That'll be Roger. Hello? Yeah, sure, Roger. Hold on. It's Roger.
Hi, Raj. Roger. Raj, calm down. Calm down.
A little bit about the history of the script. The original script that I was sent was written by Stephen King. And it was interesting that Stephen had written a script, and he'd made a very important change. In the book, Danny Pintero's character dies, but in his script, Danny Pintero lives. And Stephen said to me on the phone, he said, well, in a movie, that would just be too depressing. And that was a very important clue, hint to me from Stephen that if necessary, I could make whatever change was necessary in order to make it work as a film, that a book and a film are two completely separate entities. So Dan and I brought in another writer who rewrote the script, and this writer did a wonderful job. What she did was go back to the book and recreate the script by editing the book down to its essence and using as much dialogue from Stephen King's book as possible. Now, when I came back on the project, when I started shooting, one of the problems that existed in that script was that it was too long. The writer had tried to keep as many subplots and sub-characters as possible, and I saw that we would never be able to finish the film in the amount of time that we had scheduled, and also it would be too convoluted. So we made several important changes. One is we dropped as many of the subplots as we could and just stuck to the essence of the story, which was the relationship inside the family and the menace of the dog. And another change we had to take out of the script and that was in the book was the idea that Koo Joo was a reincarnation of a character from an evil character from an earlier Stephen King book. It just required much too much time to establish. And that would have been the only supernatural element in the story. And as I said before, in a movie's different than a novel. A novel can be long and rambling and have lots of subplots and take a lot of time to tie them all together, if it ever does. A movie is actually much closer to a short story, which has to have a very clear, concise form, and the very first few minutes of the film have to be leading towards the denouement. So we decided to drop the idea that Koo Joo had a supernatural element and drop as many of the subplots and having to do with what happened to some of the external characters. Now, the writer that had written such a wonderful script up to that point decided that she did not want to do the edits, that those edits would compromise the integrity of the story that she had written. So we brought in another writer, Don Carlos Dunaway. My instructions to Don were primarily to retain as much as possible of the script that had been written because it was a terrific script, but that it was too long and too convoluted. We had to simplify, streamline, and shorten. And Don did a terrific job of editing that script and making it concise and doing some excellent work.
Hi, Pumpkin.
Hey, look what I made.
Hey, that's really nice. What happened to you?
Nothing.
Yeah? Doesn't look like nothing.
I got hit by a swing.
Uh-oh. Come here. Let me make it better. Mwah. Well, overdone with gone, right?
Overdone with gum.
As I said earlier, this is the most accomplished film that I've made. And it's largely because it was staffed from top to bottom with excellent people. Dan Blatt, the producer, was incredibly supportive. He was an ideal producer from my point of view because he knew the nuts and bolts of filmmaking. He knew of all the technical problems that people had to deal with. And he also was very supportive of me in the creative process. I remember once when we were shooting a scene that was very complicated and we had to do 3 makeup changes during the course of the day, and I had hauled the makeup gal on the carpet and was trying to explain to her the absolute importance of her getting the actress in and out of makeup really fast when Dan took me aside and said to me, "Louis, why don't we do 2 scenes really well rather than try to do 3 scenes today and maybe not do them as well?" And that surprised me because I've come out of the world of low budget, short schedule filmmaking where one tries to cram in as much work as possible during the day, and that's the most important thing. And to work with a producer who was suggesting that the quality of the project takes precedence was mind-blowing for me. The animal trainer who worked with the dogs was an extraordinary guy. A guy named Carl Miller, who I met on this project, but he worked with me again. We worked together on Cat's Eye, and he later went on to work on incredible films such as the Australian film called Babe, which had extraordinary animal action in it. We used I forget the exact number, but we had about 10 different St. Bernards. We had a man in a St. Bernard suit. We had a mechanical dog head. And we even had a Labrador Retriever in a St. Bernard suit, which we never used, but it was on hold because the Labrador Retriever we knew was a very skilled dog and could do anything. The reason we had 10 St. Bernards was mainly because each dog had a different skill. One dog was really good at growling, another dog could run, another dog could wag its tail. So each dog had a different skill and Carl Miller had trained to utilize in different scenes where different requirements had to be met.
I won the lottery. $5,000.
I've talked about the producer. I've talked about the production manager. Actually, Dan Blatt hired a production manager named Neil Macklis, who also surprised me when we were shooting on the farm where this scene takes place. When we were shooting all the scenes with Dee Wallace trapped in the Pinto, it's supposed to be sunny and hot, and the idea is that she's dehydrating. But I think it rained for 2 weeks in a row, and we would be standing around under umbrellas waiting for a break in the rain or a moment of sunshine so that we could rush out and shoot a shot. And we were starting to fall behind schedule. And I was getting really stressed out because I've come out of the world of, as I said, of low-budget filmmaking. I started with Roger Corman. And the worst sin that a director can create or commit is to fall behind schedule. And I was standing under an umbrella with my collar up with the rain dripping down and feeling kind of depressed and frustrated when Neil Macklis, the production manager, walked by. Now, a production manager, for those that you don't know, is the guy who's mainly responsible for how the money is being spent. And usually when a production falls behind schedule, he's the person who's running around and is the first one to start screaming. Well, there he was standing in the cold rain, and Neil Macklis walked by whistling. And I said, "Neil, why are you whistling? It's raining out." And he turned to me and he said, "Louis, it's only a movie." And he started whistling and walking away again. And that helped put things into perspective for me. When I direct a film, when I agree to direct a film, I'm making a contract with the producers. And that contract is that I'm going to make the best possible film that I can within the amount of time and budget that they have allocated. But when things happen that are beyond our control, there's no point in my losing any sleep over it. You make adjustments. And when Neil Macklis said that and whistled and walked by, it took all the tension out of my frustration about the rain. And as a consequence, I believe that we were able to speed up. The stress level dropped down, and I was able to figure out ways to adjust. And the scenes, you would never know when you look at the film today that there was any rain at all in those scenes. And I don't remember. This film was made quite a while ago, whether we finished on schedule or not. But I think if it wasn't exactly on schedule, it was pretty damn close to it.
God, you scared the shit out of me.
I'm sorry.
How'd you get in here anyway?
Finished with your table. I brought it back. It's all stripped, and it's a beautiful piece of work.
Could I leave it on the back porch?
I already did. Where's Tadpole?
He's upstairs sleeping. Steve.
I miss you, okay? You know, I miss touching you.
What?
This is a scene that exemplifies some of the good work that Don Dunaway did when he did the final rewrite to edit and make the film more economical and concise. The story is told with a minimal amount of dialogue. It's told more with action than what they're actually saying. There's when Dee Wallace's husband, when Daniel Hugh Kelly walks in, right here, there are just a few lines that tell the whole story.
Go out and ride your bike, Tad.
Are you okay, Mom?
Go on.
Yeah, honey, I'm okay. Go ride your bike.
I brought your table, but I spilled some.
Steve.
Yes or no?
Yes.
I really like the economy of the writing and the acting. The music also contributed a lot to this film. The composer was Charles Bernstein, who did an extraordinary job. I'll talk more about the music later when we get into the scary sequences. One of the things that I do, I don't know if this is a good thing. It is a good thing. Every time I re-see a movie that I've directed, I see things that I wish I'd done differently or better or more of. And even in this film, which I'm so happy with, I'm reminded of things that I didn't do or that could have done differently. This scene is very good. Mainly it's really good because Danny Pinto, 5 years old, was an amazing child. It was like working with a 35-year-old man in a 5-year-old boy's body. He was so smart. He could take directions so well. He was so believable. But when we were shooting this particular scene, I had a hard time. I wanted. One of my theories of directing is that I try to bring out the subtext. I try to bring out the emotion. I try to bring out what the film is really about in the staging. And I don't like conventional, static kind of staging. Like this shot here where you got the three people lined up. It's a typical TV movie kind of shot. It works. You see all the characters. But what I had really originally wanted to do in this scene, and I didn't because we were running out of time and it was proving to be difficult, was to show how Danny Pinto's character was trying to get his father's attention and how unhappy he was by having him ride his little tricycle around banging into the car. We ran out of time and I wound up staging it in a conventional kind of way. The money for this film originally, or most of the money, even though it was released by Warner Brothers, most of the money came out of Salt Lake City. It was set up with a company called Taft Entertainment that was based up there. And they wanted a lot of local people to work on the film. It was a non-union shoot, and we shot this up in Mendocino, California. So we brought a lot of the crew members down from Salt Lake City. Consequently, we had a largely Mormon crew, and I loved working with these people. A lot of them didn't drink, and they had a very high work ethic, and this was perhaps the largest film that they'd worked on, and they worked their butts off. This scene in the fog caused a bit of stir with the local fire department. We were shooting on a hillside, and we brought in a machine called a naval fogger, which they use on battleships and aircraft carriers to lay down a huge screen of smoke, or at least they used them in the Second World War to hide their ships, to obscure them. We got one of these Navy foggers up on this hillside, and we were able to lay down a layer of fog that was enormous. But from a distance of 5 or 6 miles away, it looked like a forest fire was going on this hilltop. And in the middle of this shoot, fire engines started arriving from fire departments all over the county.
Take it easy, boy. I'm not gonna hurt you. Koo Joo?
I was originally going to use the Labrador Retriever in a St. Bernard suit in this scene to get the dog walking in a strange kind of way, but it never worked right, and we didn't need it, so we eliminated it. This house that we're looking at was actually just a facade. We built this house on top of a hillside. We didn't build the whole house. We just built the front of it to take advantage of the amazing view, which, of course, is completely obscured by fog in this shot.
I'll be back before you know it. Now give me a kiss. Come on.
There was an earlier shot, which you'll see when you watch this picture over and over again, as you probably will.
I forgot to take the Pinto into Cambers.
I'll take care of it.
A good movie begins with the script or the concept or the story. And because the characters were written as real people with real problems, these actors, who are really good actors, were able to totally believe their parts. So consequently, the audience can really believe in the characters.
I just wanted you to know it was over. I just wanted to be sure that you knew that. I can't make that it never happened, Vic.
I can't make like it never happened either, Donna.
I know that.
So I don't know what I'm gonna do yet. I don't know.
Get the rest of the bag, Brett.
Since you've already seen this film, you know that the first half or 2/3 of the film tells the story of the different characters and their predicaments, and the last third of the film is about Dee Wallace and Danny Pinto trapped in the Pinto in the farmyard barn by a rabid dog, Koo Joo. When the picture was completed and we screened it in front of preview audiences, we discovered that the audience was interested in the first third of the film and excited about the last third of the film. The interest level rose dramatically once Dee Wallace is trapped in the barnyard. So the studio, in their infinite wisdom, decided that, well, then we should get to the farmyard scenes faster, and instructed me to go back and recut and eliminate a lot of the character setup. We took out about 15 or 20 minutes, tightened, trimmed, eliminated scenes and that sort of thing, and we previewed it again. And what we discovered after we had made those trims, that the audience level during all the character development was pretty much the same. They were interested. But when we got to the scenes in the farmyard where Dee Wallace is trapped in the car, their interest level wasn't as high as it had been originally. And what we discovered from that, which seems obvious, but I had to actually witness it in action, is that unless the audience really gets to know and care about the characters, it's not going to care what happens to them when they're in danger. So we restored all the original footage, and I'm happy to say that the currently edited film represents the film as I like it, as I preferred it.
Come on! I don't give a shit! Hear me? I don't give a shit!
That's the dog that growls. Before that, we had the dog that could roll off the porch. Before that, the dog that could snarl. In a second, we'll see the dog that can jump through screen doors. We had a representative of the ASPCA on the set. No animals were harmed during the shooting of this film. And all care was taken to make sure that no people got harmed either.
Koo Joo! Koo Joo! Koo Joo!
As I'd mentioned earlier, I've done one film before this called Alligator, which had some scary scenes in it, or at least I wanted to create some scary scenes. And in order to do that, I studied as many scary films from the past as I could. And I eventually focused in on two films in particular, Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn and Jaws by Steven Spielberg. What I wanted to do is develop a set of principles that I could utilize to create scary scenes, and more specifically, to create scenes where I could actually get the audiences to scream. And there's a scene in Wait Until Dark where Audrey Hepburn, who's being menaced in her apartment by Alan Arkin and a couple other bad guys, tries to escape from the apartment. She's blind, and she tries, after stabbing Alan Arkin, she tries to escape through her front door, only to discover it chained shut, and decides that she's going to try to go out a window, which means that she has to walk back down the steps of her basement apartment and cross in front of the door leading to the room where Alan Arkin was last seen lying dead. But the audience knows that the monster can always come back to life, and they're braced for an attack. And when she walks down past the door, Alan Arkin leaps out and tackles her, and the audience screamed like crazy. And I'd always remembered that as a very scary scene. And there's also a scene in Jaws. There are many scary scenes in Jaws, but there was one in particular that I zeroed in on, and that was where Richard Dreyfuss goes underwater at night to examine a boat which is sinking, and a head falls down into a hole which has been bitten in the side of the boat. And I remember the audience really screamed during that shot. And I wanted to create a scene that would make the audience yell as loudly. So I shot a scene in Alligator where I tried to do that. And when I edited the scene together, it never worked right. And I wound up getting on the phone and calling Universal, where the editor of Jaws, who had become a vice president at Universal, a woman named Verna Fields, who was a famous editor who had sort of taken Steven Spielberg under her wing and mentored him to some degree. She loved helping new directors, and she spent a lot of time with me explaining why the scene that I'd shot in Alligator might not work and what I could have done differently. She also explained to me that they created the same problem in Jaws, but Steven had gone out and reshot the scene in her swimming pool. I didn't have the means to reshoot the scene in Alligator, so I decided to reshoot it with a different cast of characters and a different monster in Koo Joo. As a matter of fact, in this scene that we're looking at right now.
Well, I think we've arrived, Hatter.
Yeah, but is anybody home?
No, we'll see. Hello?
Now, the principles are that you establish the menace. Koo Joo has already attacked and killed 2 people. We've seen that. We also saw as Dee Wallace drove into this barnyard, a shot underneath the barn door, which suggested that it was the point of view of the dog. So Dee Wallace right now is in a situation where we know that she's vulnerable to being attacked. She's left the car, the safety of the car. Now, to make matters worse, her son can't get his seatbelt undone. She's leaning back into the car to help him undo the seatbelt, leaving herself exposed. And we have this shot, which dollies in. Now, this is not a handheld shot. It's a dolly. It's what I call a cheated POV, which leads the audience the dog is about to attack from this direction when the camera stops, and then the dog attacks. When I saw this scene in a theater, every time the audience screamed. So the technique is to lead the audience to expect the attack, and to expect that the attack is going to occur from a certain direction at a specific moment, and then to not have it occur at that moment, to wait a second and then to have the attack occur in an unexpected direction or an unexpected way. There's almost a biochemical reason for doing it that way. By creating the menace, by creating the situation where our character that we've grown to care about is in danger, the audience adrenaline level is going to be slowly rising during this scene and making them more and more nervous and more prone to being startled. But the problem is that they, at the same time, they are bracing themselves for the attack. And what one has to do is one has to build up the audience's adrenaline level to a certain point and then get them to release the brace, to get them to relax for a second so they're vulnerable to being startled. And that's why I took the extra 2 seconds at the end of that dolly and then had the dog attack from a different direction. And it worked.
See the dog. Okay. All right, we're gonna go home right now. We'll go home right now. Listen to me. We can't go home right now, okay? We have to wait. Tad, we have to let the engine die down. Okay. We'll go. Okay, we're gonna go home in a few minutes. We're gonna go home in a few minutes.
Since so much of the story takes place in this farmyard with Dee Wallace and Danny Pinto trapped in the Pinto, a large part of the challenge was to figure out new and interesting ways to shoot it so that it wouldn't be repetitious and visually boring. Elaborate crane shots, different angles, unusual angles. We had, the Pinto was actually modular. We were able to take sections of it apart so that we could get the camera in and shoot in different directions.
Mom, aren't we going? Ma!
Yeah, okay. We'll try it.
See, it looked sunny. You'd never know that it was 45 degrees and drizzling outside when we shot this scene. I was always amazed that Dee and Danny put up with so much discomfort. It was cold, and we had to spray them down with water before we shot every shot so it would look like they were perspiring. And the dogs, too, had to put up with a lot of discomfort before every shot. We had to put makeup on the dogs, which putting the makeup on was easy. The blood and the drool coming out of their eyes, that was fairly simple. The difficult aspect of the dog makeup was to create the frothing mouth, which is everybody associates with rabies. Carl Miller created a mixture, I think, of bicarbonate soda and vinegar that would foam, and we would brush it on the dog's mouth before every shot of the dog. Now, the problem with that is they would try to lick it off. So even if they didn't get it all licked off, we would have a shot of dogs licking every time we would go to shoot. So usually what we'd have to do is Carl would apply the bicarbonate of soda mixture to the dog's mouth, let them lick it a little bit. It didn't taste all that great. It was kind of tart, I imagine. They would lick a little bit, then they would stop licking, and then we would start the scene.
No.
I later worked on another Stephen King film, Cat's Eye, which I was able to work with Stephen King on. And we worked with cats in that film instead of dogs. The difference between dogs and cats in terms of training is that dogs will perform tricks and do what they're asked in order to please. They want to please their trainer. They want to be liked. Cats, on the other hand, don't give a shit. They just will only work for one reason, and that's food. So we had a lot of cats working in Cat's Eye, too. And the reason for that was that we had to reward the cat after each take with something to eat. So after they'd done one or two takes and their bellies were full, they'd stop performing their tricks. And so then we'd have to bring in the next cat. Working with Stephen King on Cat's Eye was an awesome privilege for me because Stephen King had written a lot of wonderful books. He was, as a friend of mine pointed out, a phenomenon during that period. Maybe the most prolific author alive at that point, definitely the most prolific author alive. And I was always attracted to his books because, as I said about Koo Joo, that he had the ability to take real characters, create real characters, put them in interesting dilemmas. So there were real human beings with understandable problems that I could relate to, trying to work them out with the introduction of some sort of supernatural element. And he would work out his stories in an organic, truthful kind of way. He never manipulated the character's behavior to make a point. The point was always made as a result of what happened to the characters. Stephen King wrote a book about 6 years ago called On Writing, which is a nuts and bolts nonfiction book about the craft of writing, where he shares his theories and experience and creative influences. And I was really able to witness that in action when we were working together on Cat's Eye. Cat's Eye consisted of several short stories that were taken from a book of his, of a collection of short stories called Night Shift, that we tried to tie together with a device that we created of a cat trying to catch a troll who was responsible for killing a little girl in the beginning of the movie. It's interesting, the two favorite writers of mine that I've worked with are John Sayles, who wrote the scripts for 3 of my projects, actually. My first film, The Lady in Red, my second film, Alligator, and a pilot I did for NBC called Shannon's Deal. John Sayles and Stephen King are remarkably similar in a lot of ways. They both are very prolific. They're both brilliant, terrific writers. They both write organically. By organically, I mean that they will take a character, put him in a particular predicament, and then see how the character works his way out of that predicament, as opposed to, let's say, the William Goldman style of writing. William Goldman will outline his story from beginning to end and then start writing and have the characters and manipulate the characters to get where he wants them to go. They're both terrific writers, but they're just different ways of working. Stephen King and John Sayles are both extremely unpretentious people. You're more likely to find them in jeans and a T-shirt than in a suit and a tie. They both are students of popular culture. I don't know where either one of them gets the time. I've discovered that both of them seem to read every book that's written, see every movie that's been made, watch every television show, read all the comic strips, know all about pop music. Stephen King actually plays in a little rock band that he put together with some friends. And both very unpretentious, accessible, easy people to work with, but really bright and know what they want. When the picture was first released, I used to enjoy going to commercial movie theaters to see how the audience would react. And I wanted to see whether they responded to some of the scary scenes the way I had planned, and was delighted to hear people scream when the dog attacked in that first scene in the farmyard that I was talking about before. And I was surprised in this particular scene when Dee Wallace looks over and sees the baseball bat, which she thinks she might use as a weapon. Somebody in the audience screamed, "Don't even think about it!"
You can't hold on out there. No vampires, no wolves, nothing that bite.
As you know, since you've already seen the film, that she later does use that baseball bat. She does think about it. One of the problems that I knew I'd be facing in this film from the very beginning was that animal lovers would not want to see the dog being harmed. An interesting thing happens in a movie with animals is that the audiences can suspend disbelief when they see people being harmed. They can see people falling off rooftops, being shot, stabbed, run over by cars, maimed, blown apart. And they say to themselves, "Oh, it was just special effects. It was just a stunt guy." But if they see an animal being hurt, they cringe maybe because they're not used to it, maybe because they think the animal didn't have any say in it, maybe because many years ago there were tales of horses in the old cowboy movies being harmed. So I knew that when Dee Wallace has to actually get out and attack the dog, that realism would be my enemy. That if I actually showed her injuring the dog, it would be painful for the audience to watch, uncomfortable for the audience to watch. So as you'll see when that scene does occur, that I used every technique at my disposal to avoid actually seeing the dog getting hurt while suggesting that she is hurting the dog. And I'll point that out in detail when we get to that. A lot of the fun of this movie was to create effects with montage. In this upcoming scene where the dog batters the side of the car, I had to use 5 different dogs and use different techniques, starting off with the dog racing towards the car. In order to get a dog to run towards the car, we had to remove both doors, shoot it from dead on, and the dog actually ran through the car. That's in this shot right here. And the shot of the dog hitting the door was the mechanical dog head, then a third dog rolling on the ground and getting up, coming back, and once again, the dog rolling over and standing up. Once I created the effect of the battering in the first sequence, I was able to cut around it and cut to reaction shots of Dee Wallace afterwards. Danny Pintero was unbelievable. How could a child do that? He was able to turn on the tears and turn on the screaming at will. I think we had to rub hamburger meat on the doorknob to get the dog to pull it off in that shot. Jaws was also very educational to me in terms of how many point of view shots that Steven Spielberg had to use. So whenever we couldn't get the dog to do something, we would shoot a POV shot to cut around that particular piece of action. Apparently, Spielberg had a lot of problems with the mechanical shark on Jaws, so they used a lot of POVs, and I used that to good effect on Alligator, an earlier film that I did. When we were shooting on the farm, we were staying in a hotel maybe 45 minutes away, and every morning I would ride to the set with the cameraman, Jan de Bont, the assistant director, and myself. And Jan was very knowledgeable about film history, and I loved talking to him about movies and interesting shots, and we would talk about upcoming scenes. And I'd learned at this point that Jan was prepared to accept any challenge. And I was afraid I would run out of interesting ways to shoot the inside of this Pinto and visualize the scenes. In this particular scene, Dee Wallace tries to get out of the car, is attacked by the dog, and narrowly escapes back into the car after being bitten and passes out. And while she's passing out, she's warning her son not to open the car door. I wanted to visualize her delirium and dizziness. And I said to Jan, maybe it would be cool, because of the dialogue, I was looking at the dialogue, to pan from Dee over to Danny for his line, then back to Dee for her line, only instead of panning back and forth, to continue the 360-degree pan around to Dee, and then stop, don't stop, keep going back and go over to Danny as he starts to cry, and then back to Dee, and then back to Danny, and Danny, and increase the speed of this spin till it becomes a dizzy blur. And I threw this out as a challenge, not really expecting Jan to be able to shoot it, but because we talked about some of the problems, like where do you put the camera inside the Pinto and shoot this 360-degree shot? And we talked about that, and he came up with the idea of putting the camera on top of the Pinto. So on top of this Pinto, when we were shooting this scene, was a crew of 3 or 4 people on a little platform that had been welded on top, with the camera shooting down through a hole in the center of the car with a periscopic lens so that the whole thing could spin around. So we talked about that theoretically, and Jan said that, well, that might be possible. But how do you light it? And I said, well, you just let the outside world burn up. Be a little overexposed, exposed for the inside without lights. And Jan said, well, a lot of the fun of that shot is going to be to see the outside world, which means we have to raise the light level in the car. We talked about some solutions for that, including lighting with fiber optics in the headliner of the car and that sort of thing. And we taught that conversation occurred maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, at least before we were going to shoot this scene. And about 2 or 3 days before we were scheduled to shoot this scene, Jan opened up the barn doors of that barn in the back where he had people working on a third Pinto that they'd bought, and they'd built the platform on top, and they'd built the camera rig. I was amazed. I was so delighted with that. But when we get to that, when we actually get to the shot, the 360-degree shot, I want you to notice how the quality of the photography changes. It looks a little grainier and more contrasty than everything else that's preceded it. And that's because the camera was actually outside the car, above the car, and we were shooting down through a periscopic lens, and there were so many elements, so many additional elements between the camera and the subjects that a lot of quality was lost and it became very grainy. This is another shot which I only feel was maybe 80% successful, and if I'd had the wherewithal, I would have gone back and reshot it, but we didn't. But in spite of the fact that I don't think it worked completely, some people found it a little jarring because of the change in quality. I love the idea of it so much that I insisted that it stay in the film, and it's one of the things that I'm proud of conceptually, and it does work to a large degree. This is the shot. You can see the quality changes slightly. It's a little fuzzier. We were also losing the light when we shot this shot. Because there were so many elements, the camera required a much greater amount of light than ordinarily would be needed, and the sun was going down and it was getting dark outside, and we only had one opportunity to shoot this shot, and this was it. and I love it. Part of it is because as a child growing up and going to movies, I was always delighted when I saw something on film that I'd never seen before, something new and challenging, and I felt that this was unique.
To me?
I know, Roger. I'm sorry, but I can't stay.
Oh, look, Vic, I understand. I know what you're going through.
You do?
Of course. You think I'm so wrapped up in my own problems I can't see what's happening to you? I see it. Believe me. Happens to everyone.
No, to me it doesn't.
Oh, you can't come up with an answer to the Sharp account, so you think you're through. You think the creative juice is gone. It's panic. That's all. Just panic. Hey, what did I say?
This film was probably pivotal in my career, too. I really think it was the best work that I've ever done, and I don't take personal credit for that. It had to do with the chemistry and collaboration of everybody involved. But because prior to this, I was considered an extremely low-budget filmmaker who had difficulty raising money to do my projects and getting jobs. And most of the films that I'd done prior to this point were considered sort of exploitation-type films. And this film catapulted me up into the ranks where people considered me as a serious director, and I was able to go on and start doing larger budget films like Navy SEALs and Jewel of the Nile and Stephen King's other film, Cat's Eye. Cat's Eye was an episodic film. There were 4 different episodes in it. And historically, those films aren't always as popular with audiences. It's, I guess, because it takes a little bit of work for the audience to figure out who the characters are, what the problems are, and to get caught up in the story, to suspend their disbelief. And in a film that consists of several short stories that are strung together, no matter what the device that connects them, a story is over, and then they have to meet a whole new bunch of characters and get re-involved with the story. And then, as usually the case, some of the sequences are more successful than others. In Cat's Eye, my particular favorite was based on a story called Quitters, Inc. This shot is an example of different techniques we use to show the passage of time, getting a shot of the sun coming up and the sunlight moving across the barnyard, and then the sun appearing on Dee's face, which was done with an artificial light and moving a piece of cardboard across the light to reveal the sun hitting Dee's face. Another example of Danny's awesome acting ability.
Dad, wake up. Dad. Oh. Dad.
He did such... By the way, not only were no animals harmed during the course of this film, but Danny was not harmed during the course of this film. That's all acting. That's his innate abilities. It was a little bit scary at times. He was so good. I've often wondered whether this film traumatized him for the rest of his life. I haven't talked to him recently, but I'd love to find out whether he has any pets, and if so, whether any of them are large dogs. I also want to make sure, before I forget, that this cast was great from top to bottom. Not only were Dee Wallace, Danny Pinto, and Daniel Hugh Kelly extraordinarily good at their jobs, but Christopher Stone, Dee Wallace's late husband, who played the tennis bum, did an extraordinary job. And there were some of the supporting actors who had larger parts in the first cut, but we had to trim it down a little bit, were Ed Lauder and Kehlani Lee, who did absolutely wonderful jobs. The casts were wonderful.
Anybody home? Donna?
Charles Bernstein's music was very effective. We worked very closely together, and in terms of discussing what I wanted to accomplish, and then he devised methods to accomplish what I was requesting that were far better than anything I ever could have hoped for. Developing themes for the different characters, themes for the dog, and being able to come up with musical / sound sequences during suspenseful sequences to create especially a high sustained string sound that he used. Another aspect that I was very pleased with was the production design. The production designer on Koo Joo was a French-Canadian named Guy Comtois, who had been the production designer on a movie called Quest for Fire, which was about cave people, not to be confused with Clan of the Cave Bear, which I almost directed later, but didn't, because when I was offered that project, they wanted to shoot 2 Jane Eyre books together, Clan of the Cave Bear and Valley of the Horses. And I thought it would be tough enough to do one, but to do both would be impossible. And I decided not to do it. Jan de Bont, who photographed Koo Joo, did go over to shoot Clan of the Cave Bear. And by the way, the studio that made Clan of the Cave Bear subsequently decided, as I had, that it would be suicidal to do both, and decided just to focus on Clan of the Cave Bear. And when Jan de Bont got hired, who I'd become close to and had a good relationship with, I kicked myself in the butt for fear that I'd made the wrong mistake. And but fortunately, the phone rang while I was kicking myself in the butt, and it was Michael Douglas asking me to do Jewel of the Nile, which I went off and did, which I think was a little bit more successful as a movie. And I was able to bring Jan de Bont in to shoot Jewel of the Nile with me. And Guy Comtois, who was the production designer on this film, I was able to work with again in Navy SEALs. There were 3 people who I've worked with in my lifetime, my filmic lifetime, who are among the most hard-working people I have ever met in my life, and that's Jan de Bont, Guy Comtois, and another guy, an assistant director named Kuki Lopez, who had nothing to do with Koo Joo, so forget I even mentioned him. But the fact that Guy Comtois and Jan de Bont were incredibly hard-working people and very talented were one of the reasons why we were able to do so much on this film, and why I was able to be so inventive with camera work. Jan and Guy Comtois would work closely when we would design shots to make sure the sets were built in such a way that we could get our cranes and cameras in. Guy Comtois is the one who was responsible for building the Pintos that we were shooting in so that they were modular and could be taken apart if we had to bring in a crane to shoot through the back of the car, for example. We had, of course, stunt doubles for all the actors in the film, and we were, like, for this shot, and we were able to integrate the stunt people and the real actors seamlessly. It's vital, of course, that actors not get hurt when you're shooting, and that's why we use stunt people. Fortunately, no stunt people got hurt. As we come up to the conclusion of the film, I just want to talk a little bit about how we ended the film and what I've learned from filmmaking, specifically what I've learned from this film. when I originally became excited about being a filmmaker and decided I wanted to learn how to make films, I was excited by the films that were coming out of France in the early 60s, the Nouvelle Vague, the films of Jean-Luc Godard, Breathless, Francois Truffaut, 400 Blows, Shoot the Piano Player, Jules and Jim. And I was excited. When I saw Breathless, Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, I was excited at the technique. It was so modern. It was so fresh. It was so new. My original impetus to be a filmmaker was to experiment with style, to be adventurous with style, to create new techniques, to play with effects. And I've talked about in the course of this film how exciting it was to work with Jan de Bont and be able to create shots that were extremely difficult and be working in collaboration with a cinematographer that could shoot these shots to do difficult things. Then when I began actually to direct films, I began working with Roger Corman doing car chase films and action films, and from that I got into horror films. And I was into the effect, I was into technique and effect, and that's what I loved doing. I loved, for example, in this film, I've described how much fun it was, how rewarding it was to go out of my way to create, develop set of principles and create a scene that's scary, that would make the audience jump, and then go to a movie theater and actually sit in the middle of the theater and hear people scream. It was thrilling. But as we began shooting this film and getting closer and closer to shooting the end, because for the most part we shot this film in continuity, which meant we shot the beginning of the film first and the middle of the film in the middle of our shooting schedule. As we worked towards the end of the film, we didn't really know how we were going to end the film. As you know, since you've already seen the film, that Dee and her son survive, and Daniel Hugh Kelly arrives to discover them alive, and they reunite on the porch in an embrace, and I freeze on the embrace. Originally, we were writing scenes and trying to figure out how to show what happens to this family after this sequence, how it affects them, some sort of epilogue, denouement, something that would tell us the future of this family. And ultimately, we decided that we should just end with the embrace and freeze on that. We should just end with the family being reunited, because the story, and over the years of filmmaking, I've learned that ultimately the story, what the movie is about, the message, the point of it, is the most important thing. You can't make the message or the point effectively unless the film is told in an interesting kind of way. But no matter how interesting the film may be with technique and effect, ultimately what it's about is the important thing. And the spine of this story was that a real danger coming in and threatening the life of Dee Wallace and her son is able to put into perspective all their imaginary fears, fear of financial insecurity, fear of growing old, into perspective, and the family is reunited. So we decided to end the film with the family reunited and the embrace. But at least for the moment, the family's reunited and their fears are put into perspective. This scene was the trickiest scene for me because I knew that if we showed the dog being actually hit with the bat, that it would disturb a lot of people and make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. So actually, if you look at the scene, you can see that the dog is never actually hit by the bat. It's all done through point of view and sound effects. After finishing photography, I got on a plane and I flew back to Los Angeles. And I took a cab from the airport to my home. And the cab driver and I were chatting, and he asked what I was doing, and I told him that I had just directed a film in Northern California. And he said, "Oh, what's it about?" And I said, "Oh, it's about a woman that gets trapped in a car by a rabid dog." And he said, "Shit. It's amazing what they'll make films about these days. They make a film about anything." I started to worry till I saw the final cut. Now, Dee Wallace says, the dog has impaled itself on the broken bat, and presumably she's killed it. But a lot of the fun of this film was to take conventions of the horror film genre, and play with them, toy with them. So the audience knows at any moment that dog could come back and attack again. And as long as she's outside the car, she's vulnerable. She's still vulnerable. And she didn't close the door so the dog can get in. We know that she's still vulnerable. Those that read the book, of course, knows that Tad is dead and remains dead. In my first conversation with Stephen King, he had suggested to me that, well, maybe that wouldn't be the right way to end the film. It works in a book, but in a movie it would be too depressing. So we had to bring him back to life. Trying to milk this for all the suspense we can, not knowing whether he's going to live or not. And of course, the fact that the book ends with Tad dying helped us, because a lot of the fans of the movie, or a lot of the theatergoers, had read the book and thought that he would never live. So hopefully it was a little more suspenseful and surprising to them when he came alive. And hopefully by this point in the scene, the audience has stopped thinking about the dog and thinks that this is the happy ending. What's interesting is that the audience didn't complain about the dog being hurt. I got no feedback from anyone at any time complaining about our mistreatment of animals. In fact, we didn't mistreat them, but as I explained, I was worried that people might feel uncomfortable about violence, person-dog violence. And of course, this is the ending. We had written several epilogues, which we finally just threw out and decided to freeze frame like this. I hope you enjoyed the commentary. I hope you enjoyed some of my insights into making the film. And I hope you look at the film again after listening to this commentary, and without the commentary, and having a new insight into how the film was made. Thanks a lot.